So I think for a lot of people, the term regeneration might be new. This sort of idea of regeneration has sort of just emerged, particularly in the last few years. It's been around for a while, but it's sort of now starting to be used by different organisations. And it basically says that, we had a chance to live sustainably in the late 80s and early 90s. Like, we could have created sustainable practices, but because we blew through that with such speed and venom, we've done so much damage now that we need to repair and restore the landscapes or the systems that we've created, and that needs regeneration. So sustainability is still the goal we want to reach, but regeneration allows us to get there. That's the verb, that's the doing, the action that gets us there. We need to regenerate. So it's not enough about just sort of sustaining the practices we've had. We have to actually think very differently. The perfect example, analogy there is what's happening in agriculture right now. The old system is based on basically destroying life. So, and again, I say this without any accusation or blame, because this is what farmers were told to do and they believed they were doing the right thing. But we took out diversity, which nature thrives on, and we plant a single plant, like a monoculture, and then we develop chemicals to fight and control the pests, fight and control the weeds. So we're really working against nature. Whereas regenerative agriculture, which is starting to emerge now, says, right, how do we work within the living systems of what nature already does? How do we stimulate the soil and that life? And once we put that life back in through certain practices and planting things, you just kickstart this chain of events of putting carbon in the soil, holding more moisture in the soil. The natural insects and things come in and fight, and nature's own inbuilt resilience system kicks in. So that's a great example of moving from a conventional industrial practice to a more regenerative practice that works with nature. And now we're seeing that happen not just in agriculture, but it's happening. There's a regenerative fashion movement, regenerative economics movement, regenerative democracy movement. All sorts of industries are saying, right, how can we do better? How can we actually improve and reverse the damage that our system or our industry has done to the planet? So it's a very different set of values, as we talked about before, a different mindset, because regenerative design, for example, considers nature, considers the impact on humans in a building. It's not just building up for cost and quick and efficiency. It's saying, well, how will this building make someone feel when they're working in it? Or how should we design a hospital to promote well-being and a sense of happiness, not just this cold, sterile, kind of scary environment? How do we make it feel more conducive to healing? So that's a very different mindset. And again, that sort of regenerative thinking is just exploding around the world right now, which is really heartening. It's not easy to be truly regenerative because inbuilt into so many businesses is a sense of extraction. That's just what we do, especially if we're making materials or producing goods. So how can you do that slightly better? It's not just ticking these boxes, but how can you look at the materials you're using, or is there a collection and reusing thing as opposed to generating more and more things? But particularly, I think there is right now, how do you allocate some of your profits into some of these more regenerative areas? Because again, we've ignored nature for so long, we've just decimated it and treated it as an externality to the system, that how can we start kind of bringing it back in? And there are so many organisations you can partner with now that are repairing waterways or cleaning water systems or planting kelp forests or planting whatever it might be. So again, they're really important steps right now, especially given where we're actually at. I think we hear a lot about climate change, but less discussed is the biodiversity crisis that we're in right now. And that's probably, some scientists would argue, as important, if not more, in that these are the ecosystems that our survival depends on. So pollinators is a great example. We've seen this incredible decline in insects around the world. Half of the fresh produce we get at the supermarket, all the yummy stuff, the mangoes, avocados, coffees, chocolate, we don't get those without pollinators, and we're destroying habitats for pollinators, at a crisis point. So these things underpin our civilization and they're often neglected. So, becoming more savvy, becoming more aware as a business about how you can support some of these things. Otherwise, none of this matters. It's not going to matter in 40 years unless we start repairing and regenerating these ecosystems. And that's where businesses with huge profits can actually start thinking about what they do with those profits. The stats vary depending on which agency you look at, but it's in the hundreds of millions of young girls that aren't able to complete school around the world, not just in developing countries, but even in other countries. And that's for a host of reasons. They're taken out of school to work, to be married at very young ages. The research shows that if that happens, if they're able to stay at school and they're given access to proper health services and job opportunities, and they get to then choose when and how many children they will have about 2 children. But if they're removed from school earlier not on their terms, they can have 5 or more. So there's a huge story there around empowering women anyway. That's one story. But then the impact on resources, 2 to 5 children, is a difference of 1 billion people by 2050. So that has a huge impact on our resource use and the climate. So it's a really interesting way of talking about all these issues it's a bit more palatable for people, in the sense that you're actually giving these women their own choice and empowering them and new job opportunities. Then the bonus is we get a different world environmentally as well. So I say that delicately. It's better often when women are talking about this than me, but they're the people I spoke to in research that said, hey, you should put this in your film because this is a really big story that not many people know about. Let's go and empower these women and young girls around the world. I did a project a couple of years ago called Regenerating Australia, and we were looking at what solutions be appropriate in different communities. And a lot of the frustrations in the communities, which I get, and we're seeing it right around the world now, again, as I talked about before, is if you don't live in my community, if you don't understand what it's like here, stop making decisions on my behalf. Stop assuming you know what's right for me, like especially you people in the cities that think you get, especially this environmental stuff. Come out here and see what it's like to work here. I want my child to be able to stay in this community and not leave because they can't get work. So there's obviously this incredible transition we're going through right now, and it's going to continue for the next while. How, as a business, do you authentically engage with a community? Not just from a top-down level that sort of it's all the platitudes and you think you're doing the right thing. How can you give back to that community? How can you ensure that that community trusts what you're doing? Because you've actually gone in there and listened to them and done the work. You haven't just ticked the box. Because there's an extraordinary amount of wealth that's being created right now as we transition. And the frustrations that I picked up were people saying, you might want to come and say, put your wind farms or your solar projects in my land, but then you're going to take all the money and take it out of my community. So some of these independents that won in Australia recently said, well, okay, here's a new policy. If you're going to build these solar panels on our pump, 30% of the profits have to stay in the community. That's regenerative thinking. That's how we start to heal people again, this wound that we've got, this othering around these issues. How do we make sure we're considering everyone as this new technology or this new money is created? And if we don't do that, we're going to create more polarization, more of a divide. We're going to see what's happening in America. Like, it's the great example for us to learn from. Do not leave people behind in this transition. Like, that's the news story. It's like, hey, you've done a great service to us, especially fossil fuels in Australia. You've built our entire economy. Thank you. Things are changing. How could we assist you in this transition as well so that you're not left behind? Same with the automotive industry. Same with these farmers. If we just pick up our stuff and say we're going to move on now, we're going to create such disharmony. So again, that's the human tech story we talked about before. How do we do this with more humanity and don't repeat the same mistakes that we've done in the past? Otherwise, we're going to schism who we are. And it's precarious right now. We can all feel that. We are fragmenting because we're not considering the human being in this transition or what's real for them and how difficult it is for change.